Serious, what was your biggest we need to leave now moment? I'm 19, female, on a Greek island last May with my cousin 22, female, as a part of a trip. We like to go on aimless walks out of the towns we stayed in to see what was around. On our way back from one of these walks we were on a long narrow road that dropped off on each side to beaches. A small green car passes by us in the same direction we are walking and stops 100 yards in front of us. Just sitting on the road. We say maybe they are just taking in the view. We continue to walk, and when we finally get to the car, the passenger our side window is down and the man is staring at us through the mirror. As soon as we pass, the car pulls forward past us again. Immediately after, the green car drives past us again. Large truck drives past again in the same direction and pulls alongside the green car. They both stop for a moment and are clearly talking to each other. The green car speeds off. The black truck drives forward a bit more and then stops on the same side of the road again. Keep in mind we are on a narrow road. We can't turn around because town is the other way. Behind us is just beaches and a couple houses. The black truck is stopped on our side of the road. As we get closer, the driver opens the front and back door to the cab, but does nothing else. Just stands there outside of the truck, mostly looking back towards us. We decide that this is way too sketchy. Both cars were clearly keeping an eye on us and watching and communicating. When we get closer to the truck, we nope off of the road and drop into the beach. We get as far away from the road as the beach will allow us and start speed walking. The man from the truck crosses the road and watches us with binoculars from the side of the beach. We ran until we caught up with another couple and followed them back into town. I saw the same green car drive back past us multiple times as we ran parallel to the road down the beach. We made it back to our hotel apartment thing safely and locked and tied up our doors to the balcony and hall. In a nutshell, potentially almost experience taken on a gap year trip in Greece. I was at a club and a guy pulled up and parked next to us as we were getting out to head in. The guy then proceeded to reach in the back of his sub and pull out a shotgun. He looked over at us and told us it's finna go down. We got back in our vehicle and noped out. Homeboy, did you a solid LOL. Woodstock 99. Felt the energy of the grossly overpacked crowd, the building rage, and looked my friends and said we need to go. They stayed. I left shortly after fired and riots started and my friends lost everything they had with them. Tents, clothes, food, everything. When you have 300k people shoulder to shoulder in 104-degree humidity and charge for a bottle of water and have half as many bathrooms as needed, you're gonna have a bad time. I was 15 and had just moved to a new town right in the middle of the school year. I met some kids that seemed cool and took them up on an offer to hang out and spend the night at one of their houses. The evening started off great. The host's mom made pizza for everyone. They had a pool table and a PlayStation. I was having a lot of fun when they all decided to head up to Mike's and try to buy some weed. I had not been around drugs at all but was feeling rebellious and nervously went along. It turned out that Mike lived in a questionably habitable house trailer about 15 miles out of town in the woods, with somewhat of an entourage of seedy figures. He was a formidable character, lanky, wild-eyed and rail-thin with a nervous way about him that instantly put me on edge. I'm big guy and he instantly started sizing me up, grabbing my shoulders several times and squeezing my arms. He said I looked like a fighter and asked me if I wanted to fight him. I declined. But he kept telling everyone I was going to fight him. I'm sure I was visibly nervous, but my new friends just laughed it off and asked if they could buy some weed. He insisted that we have a drink first. I had also never drank, but I did my best to choke down the warm beer that was shoved unceremoniously into my hand. I took in my surroundings as we drank. There were tinfoil and glass pipes on every flat surface, at least 3 guns, and the rest of the adults looked like they were well ahead of us in the consumption department. My friend insisted on getting the weed, but Mike kept telling him not to be in a hurry. He brought out a barn, lit it and started passing it around. This was the first time I smoked weed. He harangued me over how I wasn't inhaling enough, and then laughed like a hyena when I had a coughing fit. He kept making comments on how I was big and acted tough. but I was really just a big wuss and other choice words that don't need repeating. He also made comments akin to taking me in the back room and making a man out of me. One of the tooth-impaired women began some long monologue about a man's G-spot being located rectally. I wanted to leave immediately. I took the first opportunity to tell my friend that I thought it best that we leave. And now, he finally convinced Mike to retrieve the weed for purchase and an exchange was made. I tried to walk out, but Mike slammed the door. When I opened it, he started insisting that I was a narc and that I needed to strip naked so he could check me for a wire. This went for a few minutes as I just stood there uncomfortably, hoping he would end his little joke and let us go. Finally he said he'd know I wasn't a narc because I was going to smoke meth to prove it. I looked at my friend and just shook my head, but he was either too stoned, too apathetic, or just thought Mike was being funny. Either way there was no help there. Mike disappeared to a back room while 3 men that had been sitting on a couch got up and pushed the couch in front of the door, laughing and telling us to sit down and get comfortable. I had a hallway behind me and walked down it, looking for a way out. There was a small laundry room at the end and to my relief a door. It was only to my relief until I seen that not only did it not have a handle, it was nailed shut. Mike began yelling for me to come back to the living room. My brain was in a tailspin. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. Do something. Move. I kicked the door. It opened. There were no stairs. So I jumped down to the snowy ground and began to run. I ran into the woods, grateful that I had not removed my coat in the warm house. I heard a commotion behind me as Mike screamed obscenities at me. I kept moving. Then I heard several gunshots. My heart was beating out of my chest. I had a general idea of where the road was and headed in that direction, avoiding the meandering lane that led to Mike's trailer. I slipped on the hillside several times, but luckily there was enough moonlight to navigate through the trees. I heard a loud truck start up and then more yelling. I was leaving a trail, but couldn't avoid it. Eventually I reached the frozen dirt road and started walking back towards the highway, staying in the trees. I seen headlights coming and hid, hoping it was my friend. It wasn't. Neither was the next one. I continued walking. It is worth noting that this is years before I had a cell phone. After about 4 miles the road met the highway back to town. It was harder to avoid walking on the road at this point. It was clear for quite a ways on either side, but when a car came driving by I ducked down in the snow on the shoulder, trying to get my head just high enough to see, hoping it was a police cruiser. I did this several times. My jeans soaked, me shivering with cold and fear. It was about the 4th time or so that I did this that I noticed the car was driving much slower than the 65 miles per hour speed limit. Was this Mike coming to kill the suspected narc? I stayed low and prepared to run. As it got closer I recognized my friend's minivan. I stood up and waved and hoped for the best. My friends told me that the scene inside the house had turned to absolute chaos. After I kicked the door open, Mike had gone ballistic, screaming that I was a narc and that he was going to kill me. He had picked up a gun and pointed it at my friends, telling them he was going to kill them for bringing an narc to his house. They insisted I was not and that he had just scared me. He then stomped down the hallway and fired the gun several times out of the door I had kicked open. My friends took advantage of this moment to pull the couch out of the way and run out the front door, jumping in the minivan and tearing off down the lane. After turning onto the road, they seen headlights behind them and intentionally killed their lights and turned down someone else's lane. They waited a while and then went out looking for me, driving up and down the dirt road and highway, absolutely freaking out and not knowing what to do. They apologized profusely and insisted that nothing like that had ever happened before. We were all pretty relieved to be back together. Not long after this, Mike and several others were arrested in a drug sting. I was worried that he thought I had something to do with this and hoped he wouldn't be holding a grudge and want to come looking for me. A lingering fear that eventually subsided until one day a couple years later, I was working at the local grocery store and here came Mike, looking a little worse for wear. He looked right at me and my heart about stopped. "You're a big kid," he said. "You play football?" Went to friend's house that I had slept over at a couple times already. He left the room and noticed something under his pillow. Lifted it to find a handgun. We were 12. I stupidly even pick it up to see if it was plastic. Confirming that it is metal and reasonably heavy, I grab my shit and tell him I need to leave, but he stops and tells me it's a BB gun he spray painted black. I stayed, but these days I question the truth of that situation. Visiting Kowloon in Hong Kong. I ended up walking all day until my feet were killing me. It got dark outside and I was tired, so I decided to drop by a decent looking bar for a drink and a moment to rest my feet. It was all empty, except a group of serious looking local men in suits. They kept leering at me the whole time. The most awkward beer I ever had. None of them said a word, but I got the message, you're not supposed to be here, Guelo. I wonder what the staff thought of you. I would think that they would try to warn you, or just straight up refuse service. Had a similar experience with a Greek place. They told me they were closed at like 7 PM on a Friday night. This was in the United States. Word is that the place was a mob front. Girls camp. My last year, me and a small group of girls wanted to climb to the top of this big hill that has a beautiful lookout above the trees and clear view of the sky. It was a new moon and zero light pollution. We grabbed our flashlights and got on the trail. About 3-4 of the way up, the two girls leading us stopped dead in their tracks at the same time. One whispered to the other, "Do you feel that?" I was right behind them and heard what they said. I looked up and around. I didn't see anything, but something in the air made the hair on my neck stand on end. It was just too quiet. I started to feel very vulnerable and scared. One of the girls in front turned and said, "We need to go back. Don't run." One girl asked why not run, and they said, "So you don't trip." Valid reason, but I don't believe it was the real reason she said it. That girl who told you not to run grew up in mountain lion territory. That's my guess on what it was. We have very primal instincts when it comes to big predators like that, and this sounds exactly like it. And bears. Black bears can be intimidated by arm waving and making noise. Usually nothing is set in stone. And if you encounter a bear with a tag in its ear, the unpredictability factor just skyrocketed. That generally means that it has learned that people food, and that was someone else's problem. So they tagged it and transferred to a different state. In China, on a school trip, wandering around night market stalls of fried bugs and bull testicles. In a group of 10 or so high school age kids, a 50-60 IHY Chinese man engages us in conversation, claiming to be the curator of a local art gallery. Do we want to check out some paintings? Sure. We were bored and had lost our appetite pretty quickly anyhow. Well, we get to the gallery, which was a semi-rundown 5x5 meters building. The Chinese man talks to us from the doorway, inviting us in to see the paintings, which are downstairs. The building is in the middle of a large paved courtyard, right next to a popular tourist destination. It's safe, right? Peering through the doorway, no artwork or obvious function to the building is visible. An entrance lamp is broken with its glass scattered over the doorway, and inside shoddy steps lead to a dank unlit basement. One of us interrupts Chinese man's sweet talking, "Come down. See painting," to grill him on the broken glass. Don't worry, many paintings. Beautiful, no. Tell me why there's broken glass. At this point we are all exchanging glances, when I get the urge to break our collective stupor by yelling, "She is ITTTT." As a group we turn tail into a sprint, covering 100 yards or so, before we slow down to laugh and crack jokes about kidnapping and organ black markets. Glad it was the best memory from my trip, and not the last one. When me 11 and my mom were feeding some cows we had bought with some other people, there was supposed to be 8, but when we walked into the field they were being held at, there was only 7. Suddenly a massive black heifer emerged from some bushes 50 meters away from us, and just started bolting towards us, swinging its head wildly. I literally said to my mom, "I think we need to leave now," but the bewildered bovine would easily have sprinted us down and trampled us to death. So my mom stepped towards it, spreading her arms out wide and screaming bloody murder. It sounded like somebody had kicked a bull in the nuts. and it luckily was intimidating enough to make the cow stop and lumber away. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.